It's time now for French Connections, our weekly look at the intricacies of life here in France. And this week we're going to focus on something typically French, and that's an event that comes once a year. It's a hurdle dreaded by some, loved by others. We're talking about that moment where summer draws to an end and people return to real life. Flo Villemot is here to talk to us all about it.
It's such a particular moment in France. Now, in French Connections, we've already talked about the fact that France really grinds to a halt during the summer. Well, today we're going to talk about the whiplash that happens when real life kicks back into action. And some might say this is not typically French. A lot of countries go through this kind of transition. But in France, there's actually a word for this phenomenon. It's our word du jour. It is la rentrée, the re-entry. It's often translated as back to school, but it's a lot more complicated than that because it concerns everyone. It concerns you, Nadia. It concerns me. It concerns the government because in a normal year, la rentrée is an opportunity for the government to announce all sorts of big policies for the months to come. La rentrée is kind of like a renaissance that happens after the summer shutdown, and the media is obsessed with la rentrée. Take a listen.
Rentrée hors norme, comme
la rentrée,
une rentrée 2020 qui a été très particulière.
C'est une rentrée scolaire dont ils se souviendront sûrement lorsqu'ils seront adultes.
Well, this year, Flo, given the coronavirus crisis, la rentrée is going to look pretty different, starting off with kids who went back to school at the beginning of this month.
That's right. Now, back to school is a memorable day in general, but the 2020 edition of La Rentrée for kids is really one for the history books. It's a whole new world for France's 12 million students. Keep in mind that a lot of them hadn't been back to school since school shut down in March. Now, masks are obligatory, first of all, for all teaching staff at all levels. They're also obligatory for students in upper and middle schools. And on top of that, there are all sorts of hygiene and social distancing measures that have been put in place to keep the coronavirus at bay and also to reassure parents. Now, as for the kids, they're just happy to be back to some sort of normalcy, though it must be said it's quite an adjustment for them as well.
Ça gratte un peu et puis ça gêne, du coup, on a envie de le bouger.
On n'entend pas très bien ce que disent les profs de temps en temps. On n'entend pas très bien les questions que disent nos camarades.
Je vais essayer de pas trop toucher les copains. Quand même, c'est un peu compliqué.
Le côté sanitaire, ça inquiète plus nos parents que nous. Parce que nous, franchement, on n'a pas beaucoup conscience, à part certains. Ou alors, comme on est jeune, on se dit que on peut pas être atteint, alors que si.
Les enfants ne sont pas inquiets, moi non plus. Mais on pense que ça va être mouvementé, ça va changer avec le temps.
Pour l'instant, il n'y a pas de... Je pense que tout va bien se passer. Il faut pas angoisser non plus parce que sinon on le transmet aux enfants. Donc pour l'instant, on attend de voir.
Now, getting kids back to school is, of course, crucial for getting their parents back to the office because many found that during the lockdown, working from home and also taking care of their kids at the same time, well, it was challenging, to say the least.
Est-ce que vous pensez qu'on peut travailler et garder ses enfants en même temps?
Absolument pas.
Voilà, exactement.
C'est même pas imaginable. Même en l'ayant testé, c'est pas possible.
Et avec 3 enfants, c'est quasi impossible. Donc le télétravail fonctionne, mais avec les enfants à l'école.
Well, la rentrée has been an adjustment for us adults too, heading back to work after the summer holiday, because since September, Flo, masks have been mandatory in all workplaces in France.
Absolutely. This is part of the new normal that we're adjusting to here in France. Masks are obligatory in office places, but also just about everywhere, on public transport, in stores, as well as in bars and restaurants, unless you're sitting down. If you're in the cinema or at church, you also have to wear a mask. And in most big cities like Paris, Marseille, and Lille, you have to wear a mask when you're walking down the street as well. People who are jogging are weirdly exempt from this, as well as if you're riding a bike. But the mask is really the accessory for fall 2020, and the fine is steep if you're caught without a mask in a place where you should be wearing one, 135 euros. And all this means that if you're living in a big city, you're wearing a mask a lot. And this can be quite annoying, it must be said. But what's interesting is in France, we're not really seeing the same mask backlash that you can see in other countries. Most people, it must be said, are just resigned to it.
Aussi bien à l'intérieur que dans les magasins qu'à l'extérieur, en dehors, je trouve que c'est tout à fait normal de porter le masque. Même si quelque part ça peut être gênant, que je comprends très bien, il faut se plier aux règles.
Je préfère porter un masque pour rien plutôt que de ne pas le porter et que ça me retombe dessus.
Now, Flo, when we're talking about la rentrée, every year there's this kind of side effect that comes up, a melancholy that can take over French people.
Absolutely. I'm definitely experiencing this. We talk about le blues de la rentrée, the rentrée blues. It's that feeling of dread when you come back from vacation and you start deleting, or rather reading, all those emails that you received while you were away. And it must be said the rentrée blues are particularly tough this year because there is so much uncertainty about, what's going to happen in the coming weeks, in the coming months. But as depressing as la rentrée can be, and particularly this year, it's important to keep in mind that la rentrée is also a time of year that brings some optimism. There's something kind of magical in the air. It's a kind of opportunity for a new you. It's kind of like a second new year, if you will. You can have New Year's resolutions. You can have a fresh new start. As I said, a new you if you want one, but just remember to keep wearing that mask.
Absolutely, Flo. Thank you very much indeed. That's Flo Villeminot there with our edition of French Connections. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for now. But if you have any questions about life here in France, you can tweet, as always, to Flo Villeminot, at Flo Villeminot on Twitter, or check out our website, france24.com.